Hey everyone. So, as people are joining our session, I just want to welcome you to the latest episode of All Tech is Humans webinar series, where we engage in conversations with responsible tech leaders to discuss some of the world's thorniest tech and society issues. We're really glad you've joined us today. So, please feel free to say hi to one another in the chat, share a little about yourself, tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm in New York today. And I'm your host. I'm Rebekah Tweed, the executive director of All Tech is Human. Our All Tech is Human is a nonprofit. If you have not heard of us, we bring together the global responsible tech community, and you can find out how to get involved with all of our work at alltechishuman.org. You can see all of our different activities. We have 3 different work streams, multi-stakeholder collaboration and community building, multidisciplinary education and resource development, and responsible tech career development. Please join our Slack community if you haven't already. We just passed 13,000 members of that community. You can subscribe to our newsletters. We have 2 of those. And we also have this live stream series that you can tune into. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I want to let you know if you do have questions at any point for our guest, please drop those into the Q&A function so that we can see it. Questions tend to get lost in the chat. We are going to bring forward a couple of questions toward the end. So just throughout the session, as questions come to you, please drop those into the Q&A function. So I am very excited to be joined today by venture capitalist, political strategist, philanthropist, and writer, Bradley Tusk. Bradley is the co-founder and managing partner of Tusk Venture Partners and the founder of political consulting firm Tusk Strategies, as well as Tusk Philanthropies. He also recently launched Tusk Ventures, an equity for service firm. And Bradley's family foundation is funding and leading the national campaign to bring mobile voting to all US elections. Bradley is the author of multiple books, hosts a podcast called Firewall about the intersection of tech and politics, is the co-founder of the Gotham Book Prize, and was Uber's first political advisor, among other things. Welcome, Bradley.
Yeah, thanks for having me. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Sure.
So today's conversation, we're going to be centering that on your national campaign to bring mobile voting to all
Great.
US elections. You recently had a TED Talk, and that went live on the 15th of July.
Yep.
We're also going to be talking about how this kind of builds on your 2024 book, Vote with Your Phone,
Okay.
Why Mobile Voting is Our Final Shot at Saving Democracy. And we'll be sharing those links with our audience as well. We'll be sending that out in the follow-up email so everyone can have access to those. So Bradley, to kick us off, can you help us understand what is the main problem with how we vote currently?
Yeah. The main problem with how we vote is that it gets us a government that doesn't really work. So in the US, because of gerrymandering, I assume most of the audience knows what that is, but if you don't, it's this corrupt practice where the Democratic or Republican Party draws up the legislative districts to their liking, which means that only a member of that party can win the general election. Because of that, 90+% of elections are really decided in the primary. And primary turnout is typically about 10 to 15%. And who are those voters? They're typically the extremes, the far right or the far left, or they're special interests that know how to move money and votes in low turnout elections. And as a result, that small group of people dictate not only who wins office, but then what they do once they're in office. And as a result, we either get the chaos and dysfunction of Washington, D.C., or totally one-sided governments, whether that's the state of Texas on the right or the city of San Francisco on the left. And, if we were truly hopelessly divided, that'd be one thing, but we're not. If you look at almost every major issue, 70-ish% of people can kind of come to a common sense solution on it. Like, take guns. The vast majority of people would say we should neither go into everyone's homes and confiscate their guns, but nor should it be easy to walk into a store and walk out with an assault rifle. And yet those people in the middle don't vote in primaries. The only ones who do say either all guns always or no guns ever. So as a result, nothing gets done. And we just keep having more and more school shootings. And this is true on almost every issue, in whether it's, tech regulation or climate or healthcare or taxes or education or you name it. And so the system has created this dysfunction that makes it really hard to solve our problems, and that is really making our democracy a mess.
And so when you talk about voting on your phone, can you tell us what some of those advantages are? Why do you think citizens should be voting on their phones, and what would be the positive impact of that?
Yeah. So I came to the idea when I was running the campaigns to legalize Uber all over the country. And, when you think of Uber now, it's this giant $200 billion, whatever the latest market cap is, company. But at the time, this was back during the Series A, we were a like tiny, tiny tech startup. And taxi was this very powerful industry. And they would use their political muscle, their lobbyists, their campaign contributions, all the usual stuff to try to get the regulators to throw us out. And the only way we could really fight back was with our customers. And so we went to our customers and said, hey, if you like Uber, we need you to let your elected officials know. And we built functionality directly into the app that let our customers reach their city council members, mayors, state senators, whoever the relevant people were for that particular jurisdiction. And they did. I mean, ultimately, millions of people weighed in with their elected officials saying, leave Uber alone. And we won in every single jurisdiction in the country. And when this is happening, I remember thinking like, all right, well, God bless these people. They're helping me do my job. But my guess is they don't even know the names of the people that they're reaching out to. They don't know who their city council member is. They don't know who their state senator is. And, they're busy, right? They have jobs, they have kids, they have lives. Like, they're not necessarily on a random Tuesday going to be late to work or not take their kid to school to vote in a local primary. But when we made it easy and we put the opportunity on their phones, all of a sudden they started advocating politically. So that led to the question of what if people could vote on their phones? So that's how we started the mobile voting project. And the first thing we did was test the hypothesis. If you put voting on people's phones, will they do it? And the answer was yes. So we funded elections. And to be clear, this is a totally philanthropic effort. This is just us trying to fix it. I got super lucky with Uber that they couldn't afford my fee, so they gave me stock, and that became worth a bunch of money. And so I've been funding this effort out of my foundation. But we, in 7 different states, made it possible for either deployed military or people with disabilities to vote in real elections on their phones. And the answer was, of course, more people do things when you make it easier. Of course, more people do things when you add it to their phones. And so the main thing is, to increase turnout so that we can move things to the middle. If politicians are only answering to 10% of the electorate, and those are the extremes, they're taking positions on the extremes. If all of a sudden it's 30, 40%, they're moving to the middle simply because they just want to get reelected, right? So whatever they got to do is what they're going to do. And keep in mind, I spent 15 years of my career before tech working directly in government and politics, right? I worked in city government. I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager when he ran for mayor of New York City, and I worked for him at City Hall. I worked in state government. I was the deputy governor of Illinois for 4 years. I worked in the federal government. I was Chuck Schumer's communications director in the US Senate. And so I saw it from every angle, and I walked away knowing politicians make decisions based on winning the next election. And so if you want them to represent us, to represent the mainstream, we have to align their political incentives with our policy incentives. So far and away, the best argument for mobile voting and the biggest benefit is that it just increases accessibility, which increases turnout. Now, to be clear, one thing I learned as I was doing this work is there are groups of people in this country who are especially disenfranchised by the current system, right? So I mentioned deployed military. Imagine you're stationed abroad in, Afghanistan or wherever it is, and you mail in your ballot and it shows up like from Kandahar, like on December 1st, it goes in the trash, right? Here you are literally risking your life to protect our right to vote, and your vote doesn't even count. Or you're blind. We think voting is a pain. Imagine how much harder it is if you can't see. And then you have to hope that the person at the polling place marked the ballot the way you asked them to, and you don't know because you're blind. Or college students. I've got a daughter who is going to her sophomore year of college, and last year she turned 18. She was super excited to vote for the first time and said to me, how do I do it? She's already in college. And I sent her a link for an absentee ballot to the New York City Board of Elections. But this is a kid that thinks that email is antiquated. Snail mail is like a whole, it's just a world that doesn't even exist. But since you and I started this conversation 10 minutes ago, she's checked her phone 32 times, right? So if she could vote on her phone, she would. So there are lots of groups of people who are currently disenfranchised. And so the main thing is really accessibility, but also security. So, we have built a mobile voting system, and I can walk you through if you want, but that is end-to-end verifiable, end-to-end encrypted, has air gapping, multi-factor authentication, biometric screening, it's open source. And as a result, in New York, when I vote, I literally scribble my name on a piece of paper, and that's the entirety of our security. This is a much, much better system. So I think we've come up with something that is both A, a lot more accessible, B, a lot more secure, and C, it's free. So I've paid for all of this out of my foundation. I've put $20 million my own money into this so far, and all of the code is going up on GitHub. So you don't need to even come to me for it. It's just by the end of the year, some is already up there. It will all be there, and anyone wants to use it, have at it.
Wow. Okay. You brought up so many very interesting points there. I want to take a second to talk a little bit about that mobile voting project from 2017, kind of this
Yeah.
first iteration.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, like, how did you choose some of those 7
Yeah.
states or locations, and what kind of technology were you using at that point?
Yeah. So we wanted to have a mix of red and blue states, and we did. So we had West Virginia and Utah and South Carolina, but also Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Delaware. So that there was a mix of different places. And interestingly, our very, very first Secretary of State to sign up is a guy named Mac Warner. And Mac is a hardcore MAGA Trump conservative, but Mac was in the military. All 4 of his kids were in the military. He was incredibly frustrated that their right to vote was being diminished because it was so hard to vote from abroad. And he was looking for a solution, and he became the first state to do it, West Virginia, who you wouldn't have expected. And then from there, the states that we found were really kind of the innovators within the election world, the people who said, I believe in technology, I really want to solve this problem, and so I'm going to go ahead and try this thing out. And so that was the 7 states we ended up with. And a lot of them were states like Washington and Colorado that had historically been pretty progressive in terms of just small p progressive in terms of election reform and innovation and things like that overall. And the tech we used was the existing tech at the time. So there were 2 companies that were doing it, a company called Votes, a company called Democracy Live, and we funded it so that the jurisdictions could pick either one of them or whoever they wanted, and it worked. And the reason why we didn't just say, oh, great, the tech already exists, we're good, is, for groups of 3,000 voters here, 4,000 voters there, it was fine. But the whole reason we're doing this is to move turnout from 10 to 30 or 40, to move our politics back to the middle, to let our politicians start working together again. And you needed tech that could, A, be done securely at scale, and B, we felt like for there to be public confidence in it, it had to be open source. And yet you can't ask a company to spend 8 figures to build new technology and then just give the code away to their competitors, right? And so it was never going to happen if some philanthropic, entity like us didn't step up to do it. And so that's why we built our own tech.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. So what are some of the things that you are doing differently now with the technology that you're building to make it more scalable
Yeah.
and more secure?
Yeah. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is the way that we verify, right? So you would go on the App Store, you would download the Board of Elections app for wherever you vote. They'd see where you live, but then they figure out, okay, is Rebekah really Rebekah, right? So first thing is multi-factor authentication. Then after that, biometric screening matches up against your government ID. Now we know you're you. Then the ballot comes up on your screen, and the ballot itself is meant to be simple, easy to use. And you go through it. Whenever you're ready, when you hit submit, 3 things happen. 1, the ballot's encrypted. 2, it's anonymized. And 3, you get a tracking code, like if it were a FedEx package, you could track the progress of your ballot through the process. It goes back to the Board of Elections, and they air gap it. And once it is totally offline, then they decrypt your ballot. And then a paper copy of your ballot is printed out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. You can see where your ballot stands because the tracking code will show you that your ballot was received, tabulated, printed, and so on. And then because the underlying code is open source, anybody can audit it, anybody can verify, it's totally transparent. So those are all new features.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And as I was looking into the technology that you had built, the question that kept coming up was about that security piece. As I was looking at some of these arguments that are a few years old are about
Yeah.
how difficult it is to technologically make this secure. But it sounds like you've done a lot of work in the ensuing years to make sure that the
Yeah.
technology is secure enough to be deployed at scale. So I'm just curious, are there any of these arguments against security that you think still have any merit, or have you
Yeah.
like legitimately plugged all of the
I
gaps
mean,
here for
we've plugged
security?
everything we certainly thought we possibly could. Joe Kinnery, who's considered sort of the godfather of electronic voting in America, is the person who has led our project on the tech end. Joe's not going to put anything out there that with his name on it that he doesn't think really works. We're also starting to be clear at the municipal level, so city council, school board, mayor, in part to minimize any potential risk, right? So you'll get to like, well, Putin's going to hack this. He's not hacking the St. Louis school board election, right? And so part of it is let's start small, let's see how it goes, and then we can make adjustments and work our way up the scale from there. But look, I do want to be clear. If the standard we're held to is, could anything ever go wrong? Sure, right? Just like polling places close all the time because the volunteers didn't show up, or the sprinklers went off, or the fire alarm went off, or mail ballots get lost because the truck gets lost, or the sack falls out, or whatever it is. Things are going to go wrong in every conceivable system you can invent. I think the question is, can mobile voting be at least as secure as the other forms of voting? Absolutely. And also, the other question I'd like people to ask themselves is, what's the risk if we just keep the system the way it is? I would argue that our country is really falling apart, that trust in government is at an all-time low, our ability to resolve problems is at an all-time low. I'm not even sure if we don't change something fundamentally, like with something like mobile voting, that we're even one country in 20, 25 years from now. And so to me, you can't just sit there and watch everything fall apart and not act and not do something.
Yeah, that's great. So you had mentioned, maybe some other municipalities are using mobile voting around the world. Are there some things that you've maybe learned from those
Yeah.
examples?
So Estonia actually is the leading country that does this. And I just went over there a few weeks ago to sort of see the system firsthand and meet with all the people who've built it and run it. And it was really fascinating. I kind of took a few things away from it. One, right now, a majority of their voters vote online. You could also vote in person if you want to, but it started at 1.3%. And so it's going to take time to build up. And we're going to need not only to run legislation to legalize mobile voting, but then we're going to need to run education campaigns to be able to make sure that people know it's available and take advantage of it. So that's number one. Number two, what's interesting is they said, whoever loses the election blames internet voting. Doesn't matter what party they're in, doesn't matter what their ideology is. It was never their fault. It's the fault of the technology, right? But what's interesting is now that they've been at it, they've been doing this for 20 years. Now they have all this data. There's not even really one party that particularly benefits from it. It's sort of spread throughout. The benefit is to democracy. There's a lot more participation, but it's not, everyone here thinks, well, it's automatically going to help the Democrats, or it'll help this type of Republican, or whatever it is. The Estonian story at least does not say that. And then three, and this to me was in many ways the most important part, which is, look, everyone's always going to have higher turnout for an election like president than they're going to for mayor, right? I get that. But their local turnouts are around 50%. And the reason why it's so high, because ours is around 10, is because by making it really easy, they help people develop the habit of voting. And because you didn't really have to go out of your way to do it anymore, and it was so simple, people just started to do it on a regular basis. And so now 50% of people vote. So, you're in New York right now. I live in New York. We had a mayoral primary about a month ago, and the guy who won, Zoran Mandani, won fairly decisively, but he got 432,000 votes in a city of 8.5 million people. So that's about 5% of the population picked him, right? And that's sort of typically how it works here. Imagine if it were 50. Like, maybe he still wins, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But I know that the government we would have would be far more representative and far less intimidated by any particular special interest, who comes along to the city council and bullies them. When you talk about responsible tech, my guess is you could throw any policy change you would like repealing Section 230 or whatever it is at me, and I can show you why the low turnout system is what allows whatever entrenched interest that is to preserve whatever the law is that they like or have things the way they want it, because elected officials are terrified that in low turnout elections, if someone puts in a lot of money against them, they could lose, right? So ultimately, that's the world we can stop living in if we made voting easier.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little now about this campaign that you've launched. So, you had the book come out last fall, you've given a TED talk on the topic, and it seems like we have a great opportunity now
Yeah.
to build on this momentum and to really dig into this campaign. So I'm really curious, can you tell us about the campaign to mobilize
Yeah.
citizens? Like, how are you driving interest? And what's next?
Yeah, thank you. So the next step is actually, as hard and expensive as this has been so far, we got all the easy work out of the way. Now we're really entering the hard part, which is we have to start passing laws to let people vote on their phones. And so, as I mentioned, we're starting with cities. So this fall, we will be running legislation in different cities around the country, starting with sort of smaller cities, starting in states that typically have a history of reform already. That will allow their citizens to use their phones to vote in municipal elections. And to be clear, not as the only way to vote, just as an additional way to vote. If you like voting in person or by mail, great, do whatever you want. This is just another option in case you prefer this way instead. So we're going to have legislative campaigns starting off in a couple of months, in at least half a dozen different cities. And the only way we're going to win is with a big grassroots movement, because the powers that be, they may not like that they work in a failing government, but they do like knowing that they can hold on to power no matter what. And, if you said to them, hey, we can get turnout from 10 to 30, and then you won't be held hostage by the extremes, they would say, that sounds great, but at 10, I know who they are almost by name, right? And at 30, that's a big unknown and a risk. And I don't want to potentially take that risk. I'd rather just play things safe and have them the way they already are, even if that means the cost of the dysfunction we currently have. And so we're going to have to rally ultimately millions and millions of people to weigh in with their elected officials, starting at the city council level, then eventually state legislative level, to say, hey, I deserve the right to vote on my phone. I bank on my phone. I do my healthcare on my phone. I do my love life on my phone. I should be able to vote on my phone too. And if you don't support it, I am not going to support you in the next election. And you can win that way. And if you think about it, every major right in American history, the right to vote, Civil Rights Act, the American Disabilities Act, same-sex marriage, whatever it is, the status quo never wanted to do any of these things, but enough people stood up loud enough and were long enough and demanded their rights. And eventually the status quo had to give in. So that's what we're going to have to do here too.
Mhm. Is there a any kind of social media component, like when you were talking about the campaign on Uber, the fact that so many people had that app and
Yeah.
so I'm just curious, like, is that a part of the campaign
Yeah,
at this point?
absolutely. And so one is, we'll be developing the same type of system that'll just make it really easy for the residents of whatever jurisdiction we're fighting in to reach the right people, because they often don't even know who those people are. Also, we've got on every channel imaginable kind of mobile voting, platforms and everything else. If you go to mobilevoting.org, you can sign up to get involved. And so, yeah, I mean, we're going to need to use social as a really big component of it, because that's currently how people now communicate. And again, if you look at that New York City race I mentioned, one of the reasons why Mondani won is he ran a really modern campaign where he understood that short form video, TikTok especially and YouTube, were the best way to reach new voters. And the other candidates just kind of acted like it was still 1998 or whatever it was, and they relied on TV ads. And the world has changed, and that didn't work. And so we're going to need to use lots and lots of different ways to mobilize voters and reach elected officials to get this done.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how's the reception been so far? Have there been any groups that have been the most receptive, or have there
Yeah,
been anything
both,
surprising? Both, yeah.
both. So the most receptive tend to be the groups that I mentioned that are currently disenfranchised. So like, the National Federation for the Blind is a big ally. Military, Blue Star military families, Gen Z for Change, lots of different Gen Z groups, civil rights community. So one of our biggest supporters is Martin Luther King III. And the reason why he is so supportive is he would argue that mobile voting is the best anti-voter suppression tool out there, because his point is, and in Georgia where he lives especially, they want to make you line up and wait for a long time. So either you get discouraged and leave, or they have some excuse to turn you away. But when you're voting in your living room on your phone, like nothing they can do about it, right? So civil rights groups. So those have all been good supporters. We started talking to unions, of which I was worried that they kind of wouldn't like it. I've been mildly, pleasantly surprised so far. There's more receptivity than I expected. But to be clear, we also have our opponents, right? So there's groups like Verified Voting, Citizens Action. They're like the anti-vaxxers of voting, right? So they're the type of people, paper ballots only. And if we have 2% turnout, and that means that our democracy is totally unrepresentative, that's fine as long as we don't have any technological risk whatsoever, right? And, these tend to be people who are, highly affluent, highly educated, very privileged. They can take off from work to go vote in person and using a paper ballot because, they have flexibility. But when someone's an hourly worker or service worker, whatever it is, no one's like, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll pay you to do for a shift at McDonald's, even though you're not going to be here because you have to go somewhere and deal with voting in person. That of course never happens, right? And so, yeah, there are a small group of very elite people who have very radical views. And there are also cryptographers in the cybersecurity community who have staked out the position that mobile voting, under any circumstance, no matter what anyone ever builds, is just too risky and they will not support it. And so they're going to be opposed to us too. But to be clear, in many ways, they're the pawns for the real powers that be, the lobbyists, the special interests, the party bosses who like having power the way it is. They can't say publicly, we don't want more people to vote because that looks bad. So they'll put these other people forward and use them as the opposition. And yes, they are opposition, but the real opposition is the status quo that likes things the way they are.
Yeah. And having a lot more people voting, especially if it's mobile, obviously that opens things up to people like your daughter who, younger people who,
Correct.
for whom like the traditional ways that we vote are, not nearly as like technologically convenient. And so having like a lot more young people voting, I can imagine would make people feel a certain way who are in
Yep.
power. So I think that's an interesting aspect of this. So okay, I do want to ask, are there any additional use cases for the tool besides voting
Sure.
itself?
Yeah, so we haven't built these yet, but we've looked at it, which is one, voter registration, obviously would be really easy to do. Two, voter education. So like when I was a kid, I remember like the League of Women Voters would send a pamphlet to our home, and it was kind of nonpartisan information about the candidates, the ballot measures. We could do a digital version of that where this would be us, it could be the election office, where they say, okay, here is the information that we have about each candidate in the sort of the most objective way possible. Third would be getting on the ballot itself. Candidates have to collect signatures to get on the ballot. It'd be a lot easier for them if they could do it digitally. So there's a bunch of use cases, and there's also other use cases for people that could use the app and the technology for other than elections. So for example, shareholder votes or like homeowner associations, union elections, student elections. So, the code's up, it'll be fully up in a couple of months. It's free, so we're happy for it to be used however necessary.
That's great. Okay, so can you tell us a little about like when we send out the email to everyone, we'll put the link to
Yeah.
where it is on GitHub. Are there like where are you at in the process as far as like you said it'll be ready in a couple of months? It's going to
Yeah,
be
so
open source.
we've posted a little bit now. There will be a really big dump in October and then another one in early December. So most of the code will go up. They're telling me October 24th, and it always seems to be delayed, but let's assume that, and then all the documentation about 6 weeks later.
That's great. Okay. So we do have an audience question
Yeah,
from
sure.
Robert Freeman. So Robert asks, have you looked into the Votes VOATZ app or teaming up with, I might get this name wrong, but Nimit Sawney. Yes, thank you.
Yes, we have worked with them before. So West Virginia, the very first mobile voting election ever, was on the vote system. And so, yeah, to be clear, there's a bunch of companies like Votes or Democracy Live or a whole bunch of others that are election vendors. That's not us, right? Like the last thing I want to do is start selling services to governments. Like this to me is just a philanthropic thing. So companies like Votes, like Democracy Live, like Smartmatic, Runback, whoever it might be, they're the ones that can take the code and then adapt it for the specific ballot for each jurisdiction.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I think, let's see, I think that is all we have for today. I want to, there's one more question I had, and this
Yeah.
is maybe a little outside the scope of what you're thinking about, but it just makes me think about, um, when it comes to the fact that most of the country is in the center, but we have a voting system that maybe incentivizes the extremes
Yep.
in the ways that you've been describing. I think another thing that potentially incentivizes the extremes is social media itself, incentivizing politicians to become influencers, which can lend itself to opinions that are very much on one side or the other. And I'm curious
Yep.
what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that while mobile voting is a necessary precursor, there's a lot of tech regulation and reform that I think needs to happen. So first of all, I mentioned earlier, I really think Section 230 needs to be repealed. If you're listening to this, I'm sure you already know what Section 230 is, but it is a law that basically says platforms can anything that can post whatever they want and not be held liable for any of the content because the liability rests with the user, not the platform. But the problem is that has like really perverse incentives because human beings have an inherent negativity bias, which is an evolutionary trait. To like when we smell gas, we'll leave the house. When we see a line, you go the other way. And so when we have a choice of a positive headline or a negative headline, we're going to pick the negative headline most of the time. The platforms all know that. And as a result, it's because they can't be held liable for anything. They push the most toxic content out there because that makes them more money, generates more clicks, which generates more revenue. And so the worst of the internet, whether it's politicians or, hate groups or anyone else, or even like, look, I have a teenage daughter who learned all kinds of self-harm things on Instagram, and she's okay now, but it was terrible. And like they get away with it because of the liabilities protection. So we need to make sure that goes away. So I would love to see Section 230 repealed. And quite frankly, the reason why it isn't repealed is right now in a world of 10% turnout in congressional races, primaries too, you're Meta, you walk the halls of Congress and you say, I hear you, but it'd really be a shame if someone dropped $5 million against you in your next primary, and then all of a sudden, magically, no one's for repealing Section 230. So that's one. Two, I think we need a lot of AI regulation. We need AI regulation around deepfake prevention. We need AI regulation around kind of identifying some of the most harmful potential aspects of it and creating a system to mitigate that harm as much as possible. There was legislation in California, there's SB 1047 that I was a supporter of. It got vetoed by the governor, but I thought it was actually quite worthwhile. I think generally speaking, we should learn from our failure to regulate Internet 2.0 and look at all of the harm that has occurred, all of the teen suicide, all of the self-harm, all of the bullying, all of just the making society so much worse, so much just more crass and hateful, and say, like, we really screwed up. Let's at least not repeat that mistake with AI. And that doesn't mean that any given AI regulation is good or bad. And keep in mind, my day job that pays for all this is I'm a venture capitalist. I invest in AI companies all the time. And there's lots of things that we're trying to accomplish through AI as well. But nonetheless, I think one of the things that I see a lot in my job, because I'm probably the one person in the VC world that has a lot of experience in politics and then a lot of experience in tech and investing, is both sides don't really misunderstand each other, right? So regulation is not inherently evil, like the libertarians would say, nor is it inherently great, like the far left would say. It's as good or bad as it's how it's applied, right? And we need the right regulations in each case. Sometimes that's more, sometimes that's less. But when we take these all or nothing positions, we just end up in the wrong place.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so Robert Freeman, thank you for chiming in. Got a couple more questions from him. I'm gonna go to his final question here. How can we help out with the development?
Yeah. So we are pretty far along at this point. We've run lots and lots and lots of tests. But Robert, if you just if you go to LinkedIn, it's probably the best way. If you can just message me on LinkedIn, we could figure out. It sounds like you've got some expertise in this. We'd love to see how we could work with you. So that'd be great. And then I saw someone else just popped up a question too, if you want to take it.
Yes, Karen Dorr says, when can we vote with our phones to send a message to the AI platforms about the AI slop and the race to AGI/ASI?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree, Karen. So I would say go to mobilevoting.org, sign up, and like the sooner we can start passing laws, then the sooner we can start voting with our phones, and the sooner we do that, that empowers regular people against sort of big special interests and corporations, whether it is, OpenAI or Meta or the head of a political party or major union or whatever it is. These are the people with power in society today, but only because we have such a screwed up system of voting, we can fix that.
Bradley, thank you so much. That does bring us to the end of our time together today. So I want to thank everyone for joining us and for tuning in, and really a huge thank you to you, Bradley Tusk,
Yeah,
for
thanks
all
for
the
having me.
expertise.
I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yeah.
And you can follow Bradley's work at bradleytusk.com. And you can keep up with everything that All Tech is Human is doing at alltechishuman.org. So thanks to everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.